How's everybody doing tonight? Welcome here. It's so good to see you. I'm Dan Reginald. We're glad to have you here for what's going to be a great session tonight. Just have a few things. We're kind of all buzzing here after the big honeybee session we had the other night. Anybody get a chance to watch that? It was really, really fun. I'm not a great, as my wife would tell you, I'm not a great outdoorsman. But the speaker we had who talked about bees and pollinating and just how that whole thing works, it was fascinating. So if you like it and you weren't here, you can go online at EmpowerUOhio.org. And if you kind of go to the bottom of the page, you can watch all the classes. So if you missed one that what kind of caught your fancy, like we had a great session on net neutrality and the library levy that you're all going to vote on May the 8th. We had a little debate between the library and a person who came in and opposed the levy. And that session was part of the net neutrality section. If you guys aren't up on that levy, you should watch it. Really, you really should, because anytime any group wants to double the amount of money you're going to pay as taxpayers, I think you owe it to yourselves to be informed about the issue if you live in Hamilton County. Speaking of Hamilton County, we have our auditor, Dusty Rhodes, here tonight. Could we give him a round of applause? Oh, let's see, just a couple other things. Oh, on the net neutrality session we had, by a vote of like 3-1, the people who came to that class said they do not want net neutrality, if you know what net neutrality is. So it was kind of an interesting vote. I wanted to introduce you to our great team tonight. We've got Nita Thomas, our executive director, right back there. If you could give her a round of applause. We've got Bill Roll right back there, who's our treasurer. And we've got Jude DeWitt helping out tonight, and Jay Grunke, who's our producer. So let's say thank you to all of them. I wanted to talk to you about a couple of our classes that are coming up. We really, really got some good ones. Let's see here. So next Tuesday night, sexual harassment. It may not apply to everybody, but I want to tell you, it's a real, if you're an employer, if you're a manager, it can be a real war zone out there. I remember once I had 2 women that worked for me. They were both great employees, but they hated each other. And they just couldn't work together, couldn't be a part of the team. And one of them was pregnant. And before I knew it, I thought I did everything right in the world. Before I knew it, I had to make a decision to let one of them go, and I did do that. But of course, I was immediately, a lawsuit was filed against me for sexual harassment, which we won. But it's a real war zone out there with what's going on in that field. I think if you're a manager, if you're an employer, a small business owner, I really encourage you to come and see an attorney, Stephen who will be here that night to talk about sexual harassment. And then next Thursday night, a week from tonight, just a fascinating class, Morgan's Great Raid Around Cincinnati. It's a history class. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's something I didn't really know a lot about, but it's going to be fascinating. That's next Thursday night. And that's just our next couple of events we've got. So tonight's class, gosh, it takes me back to the glory days of the Cincinnati Enquirer, Peter Bronson. I'm such a big fan of his. I agreed with most of what he wrote, by far and away. I really, really did. I wish he was back there today, because sometimes when I read the paper in the morning, I'm not very happy. There's this one guy, I haven't really said this publicly, but I just feel like I've got the urge to say it. There's this one guy in the paper, in the Enquirer, that I just, every time I read him, his name is Eugene Robinson. Every single word that comes out of his mouth is, you're a racist, and I don't view the world that way. And I can't understand for the life of me why that paper publishes him on Sunday, because I don't think it's any better than toilet paper. Okay, sorry, I had to get that off. I just had to get that off my chest because it irritates me so much. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what our guest has to say tonight. And please welcome our community relations manager, Betty Overstreet, who's gonna introduce our guest. Let's welcome Betty.
Thank you, Dan. Before I introduce our guest, I want to do our door prize, which is going to be Peter's book, Behind the Lines. I'm going to ask somebody, would you pull a ticket for me? Oops, you pulled two. Pull another one.
I can't see, so.
Last three numbers, 120. 120, the last three numbers. Nobody? Oh, you? Oh, I don't know. This is kind of suspicious. Enjoy the book. You didn't buy one already, did you? You did? Do you want us to give it to somebody else, or you want to? Oh, that's nice of you. I'll let you pull another ticket.
Okay.
I threw yours back in there, though. I'll let you read it.
Okay, wait a minute. It's Oath 8-3. Or do I do?
There we go. Yep, right here, the winner. I'll let you give him the book. Peter Bronson was editorial page editor and columnist for the Cincinnati Enquirer for nearly 20 years. Under his leadership, the Enquirer was judged best editorial page in Ohio 4 years in a row. Before coming to Cincinnati in 1992, he was editorial page editor and columnist at the Tucson Citizen in Tucson, Arizona. He started his career in Michigan after graduating from Michigan State University in his hometown of East Lansing, Michigan. He has served on several nonprofits, including Casa de los Niños, is that right? Home for Abused Children in Tucson, Northern Kentucky Children's Home, Leadership Cincinnati, and Cincinnati Right to Life. He was a regular panelist, producer on the Channel 9 WCPO TV show Hot Seat, and also on the weekly Tucson news show Arizona Illustrated. He's now a contributing editor and columnist at Cincy Magazine and owner of Chili Dog Press, LLC, which offers publishing, writing, editing, and consulting. He has authored 2 books, Cincinnati for Pete's Sakes and Behind the Lines, The Untold Stories of the Cincinnati Riots, which he has some more books back here if you want to buy one. He is co-author of Legacy of Courage, True Stories of Honor Flight Veterans, and Legacy of Courage 2. In addition to those, Chili Dog Press has published a dozen books, including Judd Z, Irretrievably Broken, Dance When You Can, and From Salesperson to Superhero. He is active as a Bible study participant and leader at Horizon Community Church. He enjoys working on his vintage British Roadster, playing golf, and travel. He is the father of 2 and lives with his wife, Kathy, in Loveland. Please give Peter Bronson a warm welcome.
Thanks for coming. Thank you. Let's make sure this is working. Can everybody hear me okay? Well, thank you for coming tonight. And the topic tonight is of special interest to me because of my career in journalism. And so I hope I bring a perspective that's helpful. I would guess that I was thinking of it this morning when I went for a swim at the high school pool, that probably my first encounter with fake news was in high school in the swimming pool, when I got phys ed immediately after lunch. And they told us, put on your suits and get in the pool. Well, of course, we all knew you would die if you got in the pool if it was earlier than 30 minutes, right? Your mothers had told you that. And our gym teacher said, nope, he didn't say fake news, but he said that's a myth. So over the years, we've all encountered these things that are total myths that we gradually, at first we believe, we find that they're credible, they sound credible, they're reported as being credible. But a few examples that I ran across in my years in journalism. One was the missing children on milk cartons. Do you know that that was so exaggerated that if the actual numbers that the advocacy groups put forward as being missing and abducted children were true, almost every other family in America would have lost a child. This is what happens when advocacy groups get in charge of helping the news write their stories, and the news people don't adequately check it out. Homeless statistics. I began to notice that homeless statistics always increased and became front page news when a Republican was in the White House. Funny thing about that. Global warming. Well, we're getting some of that out there right now, right? I mean, we're finding out more and more how much that has been manipulated and inflated as fake news. And one of my favorites was when our business pages at the Enquirer were writing stories about how experts said we would soon have $10 gas because of George Bush. And I said, look, I don't care about your politics, and you can blame it on Bush, but I'm sure you wouldn't have done that to Clinton. But look what you're doing to the tourism industry. Look what you're doing to travel. Look what you're doing to hotels, all these people who work in that industry, because you're killing them. And you're doing it so irresponsibly based on what some expert said. So let's start by asking, what is fake news? So if you immediately knew who this is, you might be consuming too much media. You probably look at stories like this and ask yourself, is that real or fake? I mean the news. And when 60 Minutes is getting scorched by the rest of the media for not telling us enough about the president and the porn star, we know we're in the fake news zone, right? So I've worked in newsrooms for 30 years as a reporter, editor, and columnist. I saw standards steadily decline. With each election, the coverage became more and more partisan. I often compared it to that famous scene when Woody Hayes couldn't stand it anymore and jumped in to tackle a player on the other team. That's what journalists did. They couldn't stand to just sit on the sidelines anymore. They had to get in the game and tackle somebody. And what do you know? It was always a Republican. And you know, fake news is often disguised as breaking news, but it's more like broken news. In fact, it's not even new. Thomas Jefferson said, the press is impotent when it abandons itself to falsehood. And that's all the way back when CNN was Colonial News Network. So this is even more true today, I would say. For example, as I watch the media today, the more they try to destroy Trump, the more they destroy their own credibility, and the more impotent they become. The only thing the press has is access to power and its own credibility. And partisan reporting is poison to credibility. It's no coincidence that Cincinnati Enquirer's circulation has dwindled as fast as its credibility, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. In fact, fake news is so old, it goes back to creation itself. In the beginning, there was fake news. That's from the Pope. He said, fake news was the strategy employed by the crafty serpent in the book of Genesis, who at the dawn of humanity created the first fake news, which began the tragic history of human sin. The strategy of the skilled father of lies is precisely mimicry, that sly and dangerous form of seduction that worms its way into the heart with false and alluring arguments. Break it down, and what he's saying is that fake news is usually something we want to believe because of our political inclinations. For the media, what they want to believe and what they keep telling us is that there's no such thing as fake news, right? Ask them, put them on a panel, they say it's all a myth, which is very ironic because fake news actually started with the progressives in the media, but we'll get to that in a minute. So as long as we're in the garden of good and evil with the Pope here, I'd say that's a lot like saying what they used to say about Satan, which is that his greatest achievement was to convince everybody that he doesn't exist. And the greatest achievement of liberal media is to convince everybody that they are nonpartisan, that they are objective, and there's no such thing as fake news. But again, the Pope says there's no hell, so I'm confused. Anybody who could say that has never been to a Cincinnati City Council meeting. And just to provide equal time for Protestants, Franklin Graham says that fake news is real, and he warns about a real coup that's going on in this country, not with bullets, but with headlines and breaking fake news. If this is true, it's a much bigger story than Watergate, right? A coup, in America? But how can we trust the media to tell us the truth about it if they keep spreading fake news about things like climate change, machine guns that are in fact semi-automatic weapons, and things like hands up, don't shoot, which was completely fake news? So what's the truth about fake news? First of all, it's nothing new. The research that I did found out that fake news was a term invented by progressives in the news media, basically to weaponize doubt and marginalize and discredit news sources like Breitbart and Drudge. Obviously, it backfired. So what we know about fake news, it's nothing new. It comes in many forms. It's intentional, not a mistake or a typo. Lord knows I've made plenty of those in 30 or 40 years of writing columns and editorials and news stories. And they're honest mistakes. People who complained about mistakes when I was editorial page editor and handled letters to the editor, I would say that on a given day in the Enquirer, we would print probably 600,000 or 700,000 words. Can you print that many words without making a mistake? No. So fake news is also worse than no news. It undermines our trust and damages our society. And it destroys the press's very important role to inform us objectively, such as a case in point, Vietnam. This is a disturbing picture, and the reason it's disturbing has many reasons. I mean, it's disturbing just looking at it, but let me give you some background. Has anybody here read Way by Mark Bowden that's out right now? Great book, I recommend it. In his book, he mentions the battle at Way during Vietnam in 1968 during the Tet Offensive. And he points out that this Pulitzer Prize winning photo was taken by Eddie Adams, and Adams later regretted the picture, which helped turn America against the war. It was not reported at the time, and has long since been forgotten, was that the Viet Cong soldier here who was being executed by the police chief in Saigon was killing people by the dozens. He led purges of Vietnamese citizens and Americans that they captured and took prisoner. He was caught in the act near a mass grave with 30 bodies. And understandably, the police chief had no patience with that. But what we saw instead was a picture that said that we were brutal and as corrupt as the Vietnamese, and why would we fight such an unjust war? The Tet Offensive itself was in fact a military defeat for North Vietnam, but is mostly remembered as a victory because it was a propaganda victory. And a lot of the credit for that goes to the American reporting. A reporter who was there at the time said, combat reporters knew and wrote that the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong had lost the Tet Offensive militarily, but they were overshadowed by the media stars flown in from New York or Washington for brief visits who often made ideologically motivated pronouncements on camera that were really a form of malpractice. Walter Cronkite, some of us remember this, stated in front of millions of US viewers that the war could not be won, when in fact we had just witnessed American and South Vietnamese soldiers shed their blood vanquishing the communists and destroying their infrastructure. There's fake news. And it had a profound effect on our country. As an opinion writer, I know a lot of fake news tricks. There's all kinds of ways you can spin it. You can bury the balance on the jump page. How many times have you read a story that's only quoting one side until you get to the last paragraph? Or it will say, Mr. Jones, who represents the other side of the story, was unavailable for comment. What that usually means is they called him at about 5 minutes to 10 just before the last deadline and the press started running. Or they put the quote, very brief, spend half an hour on the phone with you and quote one sentence, and that's their balance. Happens a lot. Another thing you can do is say that good guys say something and the bad guys claim. This sows seeds of doubt. As you read it, you may not notice, but overall, you're going to get the impression that what they're saying is unfounded. There's dial an expert. Everybody in the newsroom had a Rolodex in the old days, nowadays a contacts in their computer, of people who are willing to give you the quote you wanted on any moment's notice. Pick up the phone, dial an expert, and you tell them what you're writing about and where you're going with it, meaning where you want it to go, and they will give you the quote you want. There are certain people in DC you can recognize because they're quoted all the time by the same media people and recycled, and they always provide just the quote that's needed to push the right agenda. Another is recycling. So instead of doing your own reporting, you may get fake news from CNN, and everybody else in the media will, rather than check it out and write the story themselves or do any reporting, they will say, CNN has reported. So fake news gets spread automatically based on the fact that one media company or platform has reported something. There's what I used to call the highly placed sources. Well, this can be anybody. Highly placed, what does that mean? Does that mean somebody next to the person who's next to the person who's next to the person who might be important? Could be. Highly placed to whom? And what is their agenda? Why are they talking to the media? They're pushing something. I like the one, it's a crowd of one. I see this all the time. You'll see it in a story and it'll say, some say that the president may be mentally ill. Well, what some say is really the reporter. If he had a source, he'd cite it. Or if it was even closer, he might even say a highly placed source, but they like some say. And then there's you don't say. It's what people leave out. We recently witnessed some of the leading flagships of American media crusade to block the public's right to know. I'm talking about the House Intelligence Committee memo on the FBI. Some of our most respected news organizations, the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, CBS, all these networks, all these mainstream media companies were actively crusading and campaigning to keep that from going public. What is going on? As Wall Street Journal columnist Kimberly Strassel wrote, I've been in journalism all my life. I have never seen the press corps fight so hard against transparency. I believe in the First Amendment. I thought the mainstream media did too. Well, once upon a time, the Enquirer was the gold standard for media in Cincinnati. If the Enquirer said it would snow in July, thousands of readers would line up at Kroger and fill their baskets with bread. Then came Chiquita. For those who don't remember, a multi-part series alleged crimes and unethical business by Carl H. Linder and his family as owners of Chiquita, the banana importer. But within days of publication, suddenly that story was retracted and the paper published a front page apology. The lead reporter had illegally wiretapped voicemails to obtain the story. The Enquirer said in its apology and publicly that it paid, quote, in excess of $10 million in damages to Chiquita. The actual amount, $20 million. Yeah, that's in excess of $10 million, for sure. Some at the paper still insist that the whole story was true, but flawed. Sort of like Dan Rather's false but true reporting on George Bush's National Guard service. But how can you trust someone to report the truth who breaks the law and then lies about it? That's what happened. And the Enquirer, after that, was never quite the same. And then there was the great unrest of 2001. In 2001, Cincinnati had the worst urban riots in America since the Rodney King meltdown in Los Angeles in 1991, 10 years earlier. 5 years after the Cincinnati riots, I went back and interviewed the police and local people who were involved, the council members and politicians and so forth, and wrote a book about it. What I heard from them again and again was that what was reported was seldom true, and what was true was seldom reported. Fake news. Such as what you heard if you were reading the Enquirer and listening to the local media on a daily basis was that it was not a riot. It was an uprising. It was unrest. As the police said, some of those people were almost unrested to death. The local media reported again and again and again, like a mantra, that 15 black men in custody had been killed by police. In fact, there were 2 or 3 whose deaths were really questionable. All the rest were actively resisting arrest, were not in custody, and were attacking the police with weapons that included guns, knives, boards with bullets in them, with nails in them, and in one case, a brick. So that was hardly accurate to say that 15 people were killed, but they got repeated and spread nationwide. There were no reports during the riots on the hate crimes against white motorists who were beaten and dragged from their cars. We found that out later. And the historic collaborative agreement was a tremendous boondoggle that cost the city tens of millions of dollars and achieved basically nothing. Yet it was hailed in the media as the historic collaborative agreement over and over. So I might be kind of a victim of old guy-itis, but fake news really seems worse than ever today. I blame sore losers in the media and in the public who can't adjust to the fact that they lost an election. We've become too much like fans of certain basketball teams or football teams who learn to hate their arch rival. And we don't have any appreciation anymore or common ground where we can accept defeat, talk about it, and move on. Fight harder for the next time. I blame too much news. We have a nonstop cycle of shout shows, and they just keep aggravating and stirring us up. I blame the partisan useful idiots, a great term that was created by Marx. The partisan useful idiots in the press who parrot the party talking points. You know, you can see this happening. You turn on those shout shows and you're going to hear people going back and forth, and you can change the channel and the people in the next studio on a different network will say exactly the same talking points that you just heard in the previous one. How does that happen? Are they all mind melded, or? It's amazing. And then you see the same talking points in the media, reported as news, fake news. And more than ever, I blame clickbait social media. It's gotten to the point where media companies don't really care if it's fake or real. If it's fake and it causes a big sensation, but it gets a lot of clicks, so what? They have achieved their goal for the day, which is to get all those eyeballs on their web pages, all those clicks on the ad pages, and it boosts their revenue. And if they come back a day later with a little tiny correction that says, no, that didn't happen, hey, so what? And shame on us too for having such a short attention span that we let that happen and still trust them again and fall for it over and over. So, what next? In Malaysia, they're discussing a law that would punish fake news reporting with a huge fine and 10 years in prison. But I don't think we want to follow a country that canes people for parking violations. I think we can agree that a government-regulated press is not a free press. So, as Jefferson said, fake news is worse than no news, but what do we do about it? I'd say one option is to punish with our purchasing power. We're already seeing this happen. Some of the worst offenders in the fake news sweepstakes are losing ratings and losing market share and losing income because their advertisers can see that they don't have as many viewers or readers and their circulation is dwindling. We've lost a lot of the newspaper industry, and I believe fake news bias is part of the reason. Now, if you look at the media, what they'll tell you is that the internet is responsible for the slow extinction of newspapers, and in large part that's true. For example, classified advertising used to account for 1/3 of revenue at the Enquirer. The other third was subscriptions and display advertising. So what happened to classified advertising? How many remember having a Sunday paper that was so big your dog couldn't drag it up the steps? And most of that was classified ads, remember? Well, then along came Monster.com, Cars.com, Auto Trader, all these websites that just completely pulled classified away from newspapers. They lost a third of their revenue. So yeah, that was a big deal. Internet news also means newspapers no longer have a franchise for timeliness. By the time you see it in the newspaper, it's old news, right? It's been on the web, it's been on the radio, it's been on TV, it's been everywhere. Unless, of course, the newspaper is doing what we used to call enterprise reporting and coming up with stories that only they can report because they're willing to put the shoe leather, the time, the work into it. Now, the Enquirer still does a little bit of that, or they're trying, but it's pretty much gone. And web versions of newspapers gave away the store. Why would you sign up for a subscription and pay for it if you can go online and read the whole paper? It's one of the biggest mistakes they made. But there's more to it than just that. I'd say that bias is also part of the story, and that's never mentioned when newspapers write their own obituaries. As an editor and columnist, I heard from hundreds of readers in a week, sometimes hundreds in a day when I would open letters to the editor. And I can tell you that frustration with bias in the paper was very real and is a big reason so many people gave up on the Enquirer. I've heard it mentioned even with a couple of people who stopped to talk to me tonight before we got started. They just couldn't read it anymore. It doesn't speak to them. It's pushing an agenda and a view of the world that is two-dimensional. It doesn't even talk to Cincinnati. And as media becomes more partisan, we have no common ground to stand on for discussion. We have our own left facts and our right facts because we live in bubbles of fake news. I believe this is a reflection of the larger culture of postmodern relativism, which has been called in some circles the end of truth. That's another whole thing. We could spend a lot of time talking about it, and it's a very deep topic, but I think it's real, and it's causing a lot of problems in our country, especially with the generations that are coming up. It's a real threat. How do we learn from history if we keep rewriting it on a daily basis? How do we learn from the past if we're unwilling to even have a statue of somebody who represents the past, good or bad? How do we solve a problem if we can't even agree on the basic facts and causes? Another option, this may sound strange from somebody who spent his entire career in journalism, is to go on a media diet. Consume less cable news calories. I've tried this. I go on vacation for a couple of weeks in Florida and I quit listening to the news. I sleep better. I'm happier. I'm not angry. I'm not worried. I find that everything just seems fine. And you know, when I come back, I didn't miss a thing, really. Cable news is basically a panic factory. You know why they have those things going across the screen? Breaking news, breaking news, breaking news. Because they're not pushing breaking news. They're just trying to keep you agitated, make you feel like something's really important's happening and you have to watch it or it'll just get worse. And it gives you the illusion or the delusion that you might have something to do with this. But you know what? It's designed to make us anxious and angry about things that we have absolutely no control over. That's a recipe for unhappiness, isn't it? I mean, think about some of the stories. You might hear about a shooting at YouTube headquarters, and it's on the national news, wall to wall, for hours at a time, nonstop. And you know what? I was in Casa Grande, Arizona, when a guy walked into a printing plant and shot 3 people. It was a local story. It was a big local story, but it was a local story. I have nothing to do with the YouTube factory. I look at YouTube from time to time, but I'm not saying that it's not an important story, that yes, maybe it makes national news, but the coverage is just so far over the top. It gets people totally spun up about what's going on and makes it, in my opinion, even worse. So I would recommend dial back on your media intake. And that brings us to from what we see in DC, I'd say this explains a lot. However, if you look closely, you'll see John Glenn is in the lower right-hand corner, which means that this story is way out of date. In fact, today, there are a lot more than 12 space aliens in Congress. And finally, you might have missed this story today. Was the Stormy story a Russian plot to sabotage our democracy? Details on page 3. Page 3. Was Putin linked to porn star? No. But we got your clicks. You know how easy it is. That's how easy it is to make fake news. You just put things together, raise a question, get people to think there's something to it, and from there, who cares? So I'll just conclude by saying, if anybody thinks that fake news is not real, consider this. A survey came out this week from Monmouth University Polling Institute, which said that the vast majority of Americans believe that mainstream media outlets report fake news. We're not surprised, are we? 77% of 800 respondents said their distrust for major news organizations in both television and print was caused by fake news. So polls can be wrong, but I would guess if we asked this crowd right here, we'd probably come up with a similar number. So that's what I have to offer on fake news. I appreciate you coming, and I'll be glad to answer some questions. Thank you.
Who's got a question for Peter Bronson? Right,
Yeah.
right over here. Would you say Betty's coming over? Will you say your first name, please?
Hi, Kerry. Channel 12 did a little advertisement. They've been doing advertisements on fake news. We apologize. Sometimes we make mistakes, and let us know, and we'll get back to you. And I just recently learned quite a few other stations are doing the same thing. What do you think their mission is for that advertisement?
You might be talking about Sinclair Broadcasting.
Yes.
And this has become another big controversy in the media, that these properties that are owned by Sinclair, and there are many because they're becoming a big media company, and they're not popular in the rest of the media because they try to stay in the middle or more like Fox. So what you're seeing there is that they've issued a mission statement, and they've asked their news anchors on all of their properties to read that mission statement. And yet the media acts as if this is Big Brother, that they're trying to influence you because they're talking about fake news, and that this is in fact fake news. Well, in fact, here, look at this. When I worked at the Enquirer, when I first came to Cincinnati in the 90s, Scripps, which owned nearly as many papers and maybe more than Gannett at the time, published one editorial for each presidential election, and it was published in every one of their papers. There was no complaint that that was manipulation or Big Brother at work. Newspaper chains have mission statements at the top of their masthead. I think Scripps is something to the effect, we show the light and the public will find its way. The Washington Post says, truth dies in darkness. It's a mission statement. It's a statement of what you believe in. Sinclair is doing nothing worse than that, in my opinion. And I'd applaud them for hitting it head on and saying, look, we're not going to pass along fake news, and we're going to be alert to it, and we want you to hold us accountable. Will it change their behavior? I think yes, it does. If the top of the organization in a big corporation says, this is our goal and this is what we want, I saw this happen again and again at Gannett, it really does have an effect. People know that's what's expected. The publishers, the editors, the reporters, it filters down and eventually does mean you can be held accountable. Yeah.
What are some big names behind these fake news or fraud news? Is George Soros one? And are others like him that have enough money that can influence what comes out in the paper?
I think we're just beginning to scrape the surface on that. And, you know, as a conservative, I've always been suspicious or skeptical of big bureaucracies and their agendas. And I've often wondered about the deep state. We didn't call it that. We just called it the Washington establishment, the lobbyists. What we're seeing now is really disturbing. What we're seeing with the FBI, with the Justice Department, with what happened with the IRS, persecuting people who had political opinions that the president disagreed with. On and on, we're seeing these huge bureaucracies, corrupted, and yet they are manipulators of fake news. Who has manipulated fake news? People like Andrew McCabe at the FBI, James Comey at the FBI. They have leaked and deliberately curried favor with certain reporters at the Post and the Times and on the networks who are their favorite reporter, and that's their favorite source, and they trust each other, and they can manipulate news to, like, it's amazing. And that's one of the great, I think, sources of what's happened in the past year and a half, 2 years, with the whole Russia collusion thing, which is turning out to be one of the biggest fake news hoaxes in history. And it's tied us up in knots for 2 years now. And that was all started, if you believe what's been found through the House Intelligence Committee, that was all started by people at the FBI and the Justice Department. And maybe we're going to find out who else. But they had an agenda, which is what Franklin Graham was talking about in that quote, which is to destroy a president. Regardless, you know, the heck with what the people think. They're going to do what they want because he doesn't play the game by their rules. Now, there are some big money people who are pushing these agendas and creating fake news. The marches by the kids after Parkland are being financed by some huge left-wing groups. And yet you don't see that in a lot of the media. You have to go look for it. Soros is doing it. Tom Steyer is doing it. Planned Parenthood. A lot of organizations are out there replacing or pretending that their AstroTurf is grassroots, and it's not. And the media, because it fits their agenda, they just amplify it and spread it.
Could I ask a question, Peter?
Sure.
Like back in when you were at the Enquirer, it seemed like there was almost a breed that journalists, they had this creed, you know, that they only would tell what was the truth. And everybody seemed to believe them. And all these journalists at all these stations that are reporting the fake news, is the creed still there, or are they just doing what they're told because they have to? Or what's your take on that?
It's disturbing, and it's part of a huge change in what constitutes ethics in journalism. It used to be that you would not be part of the story that, as a news reporter. You wouldn't express an opinion or try to favor one side over another. Your goal was to always, pure objectivity is an ideal. None of us can completely keep our emotions and feelings out of a story, but you would strive for that ideal. I think that's been abandoned. I don't think there's hardly a pretense of it. We have reporters at the Enquirer and at all newspapers now who have an agenda beat. Their agenda beat might be homeless, it might be illegal immigrants, it might be, they're only telling one side. And they're always feeding you one side of the story because they're not reporting, they're crusading. And if you listen to what they say, more and more, they're just right up front about it. One example was that one of the reporters on, I think it was CNN or one of the networks, said, we have to keep talking about Parkland because we have to keep this conversation going so that we can get this change made to start reducing the freedoms under this Second Amendment and start getting those guns off the street. That's not reporting. Your job as a reporter is not to keep a conversation going or to push an agenda. It's to just tell the facts.
I just wanted to make a comment. So the first time I heard that Sinclair thing about how they were going to be unbiased, I watched the news that day. That very day, they just kept saying how wonderful these kids in Washington, D.C. were. Mm-hmm. And it was like, this isn't just telling a story. This is pushing an agenda.
Yeah, it is. The agendas are, I mean, as a consumer, a media consumer, you have to be careful because there are agendas on the right too. Just because I agree with some of those agendas doesn't make that any better for journalism or for media. It's just as bad to let it poison your credibility. So, yes, sir.
Back in the 90s, there was an editorial or a commentary article in the Wall Street Journal. It was about a man that worked for Gannett in one of the paper in Vermont. And he had some kind of dispute with Gannett. Basically, what he was alleging was that they had his job performance, part of it was judged based upon the multicultural content of whether he was an editorial writer or news reporter, I don't know. But they actually had a system that supposedly, that every person on the editorial side was judged by in terms of how much multicultural content did they have. Was that fake news or was that true?
That was true. I was there when that was happening, and it was disturbing. It was part of a diversity initiative by the corporate office. It goes right to this question about, can the corporate office at the top influence the rest of the paper? It sure did. They began to set quotas for newsrooms for diversity hiring. They demanded that certain quotas and balances and types of people would be on the editorial board. They would pay bonuses to publishers who achieved those quotas. That's how they did it. And when anybody would bring this up, as some foolish conservative in the newsroom did once, that this was wrong, it was pretty clear you weren't supposed to say that if you wanted to keep your job. In other words, we hired a lot of people who were less qualified because their paint job was different.
We've got a question right here. Would you say your first name, please?
Pauline, my question is, when you talked about the bureaucrats and what they're doing, isn't that Congress' responsibility to rein them in and do something and change it? I just feel like they have taken forever and they're not doing their job. They're not helping us.
That's very true. I agree with that. In fact, there was a good column in the Wall Street Journal a while back making the point that if they had done what they should have with John Koskinen at the IRS and impeached him and put Lois Lerner in jail for what she did, if they had done that, where would we be now? The FBI wouldn't be daring to drag their feet, would they? The FBI, when the Congress said, you bring me that, they would say, how fast? But no, they would defy Congress with impunity because Congress has abdicated most of its enforcement power and passed it off onto other people.
Peter, I tell you, I have some friends who stopped taking the Enquirer specifically because they were upset with the transgender thing being rammed down their throat virtually every day.
Yeah.
And they're decent people. They don't wish anybody bad times, but they just, it's constant. But what I was wondering, I see Trump's approval numbers keep going up. And do you think that's a rebound of people just so upset with the fact that the press is hammering him viciously on a daily basis? Do you agree with that?
I do. I think that's part of it. And I think part of it also is that the positive effects of the things that he is achieving are evident. They can't be hidden, no matter how hard the media tries. And that's why I have no problem with his tweets. He goes around the media. And where would we be trying to understand what he's trying to achieve? They're inartful, they're sometimes crude, but he says what he's trying to tell us, and it comes across loud and clear. And if he had to go through the filter of the media, we would never hear any of it. And people understand now that the tax cuts are working, the economy is doing better, the stock market, as much as its volatility is disturbing, is better. That what's happening, look what just happened with Mexico. The paper today said the caravan stalled in Mexico City. No, the caravan didn't stall, they backed down because our president said, how dare you? You know, don't step across that line, and they said no. But yeah, it's a lot of things. I think that what you point out is part of it, and part of it is people are just catching on that he's getting things done.
Peter, we have an online question right back here. We will get to everyone.
Okay. Dan is asking if you can share an opinion about newspapers, internet sites, internet news, broadcast news, any sources that you think are inclined not so much to hit us with fake news.
Well, thanks for the question. That's a good one. As I probably mentioned, I read the Wall Street Journal. I trust it pretty much, but that headline I just pointed out, that was from the Wall Street Journal this morning, that they stalled. No, they didn't stall. They were forced to stop by Mexico because Trump told them he would start messing with NAFTA. I look mainly online, I look at aggregators. When I read the newspaper, I have to have a hard copy newspaper at least once a day. It's just part of me being in the business. But I look at aggregators on the web. I look at people who collect a lot of different sources and bring them together so you're getting a sample. I look at Drudge. They still break a lot of news, and he has a lot of good stories along with the crazy ones about the aliens in the Senate. And I look at things like, let's see what else I look at. Lucien, Wall Street Journal Online, National Review Online. I've got about a half dozen or so websites that I kind of just zip through in the morning to get my news fix. And as far as television, I have not watched a network news broadcast in probably 20 years.
Right.
I just don't respect them. I don't trust them. I don't trust PBS, the true government paid house organ of the left. I don't trust them. Maybe I'm just getting way too far to the right, but you know, that's the way I feel about it.
Here's a question right here.
Melva. Hi, Pete.
Hi, Melva.
You know, I remember when I was first going downtown during the time of the riots and getting involved with that. And I really had a lot of respect for the newspaper. They were just the gods. And what I saw down there just absolutely turned me around down at City Hall and all the nonsense that went on during the riots and so forth. And honestly, you were the only one that was telling the truth about anything. And when you left the newspaper, I gave the newspaper up because you were the only thing I was reading it for. So,
Thank you.
you know, so I'm very glad that now people are starting to question it, because at that time I would rage to people about what was going on and they thought you were crazy.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, Melva, by the way, for those of you who don't know her, she was a real warrior for Westwood Concern.
Mm-hmm.
Still is. And boy, she went through a lot. And those people over there fought a really tough battle at City Hall. And you saw a lot of what was going on down there.
Yes.
When we say city council meetings can be like hell,
Yeah.
it's not much of an exaggeration.
Not too much better today.
Thank you, Melva.
This is Paul. I have a question. Do you have an opinion why Hillary Clinton is still out there in our faces in the news media?
You know, the more I watch her, the more I hate to be the armchair psychologist and everything, but I think she just really needs some counseling. She, as Ann Landers used to say at the end of her columns, you need professional help. She needs professional help. She's not doing herself any favors. She's not helping her party. She's an embarrassment. And we've seen other presidents that made fools of themselves, like Al Gore. Jimmy Carter could never shut up. But mostly people have taken the high road and said, when I leave, I'm just going to sit back and let the other guy make his mistakes and zip it. And she just can't. I think that's probably a sad measure of just how devastating that failure of hers is. And I think deep down she knows it, and everybody in her party knows it.
Hello, my name is Barb.
Hi, Barb.
And a couple of weeks ago, I saw on Channel 12, Cammie Durkin made a plea about the fake news that has been coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if the station's going to be proactive on something like that, or this will set a new standard if they start. Do you see something in the future that?
What I would encourage, if you see positive things like that, let them know. Let them know you appreciate it, because they're for sure hearing from people who don't like that. And some of the people who don't like it are probably in their own newsroom. But they don't even want to acknowledge that fake news could exist, because then that you'd have to admit that some people are pushing a liberal agenda through their abusing their media responsibility to push a one-sided view. So I would just encourage you, give them a call, say thank you for putting that in focus. You know, what you said, Dusty, about the transgender thing and pushing one thing like that, it used to drive me crazy how the Enquirer had this attitude that Cincinnati is stupid. The newsroom, if you took a poll, they would probably tell you Cincinnati is stupid because they're too conservative and they're not smart enough to be liberal like me and all my friends who are obviously smart because they agree with me. And this attitude was so obvious when we would do readership surveys, and the readership surveys would say, what's your biggest concern about the Enquirer, or in the case of Tucson, the Tucson Citizen? The readers would come back overwhelmingly, too liberal. You know what the newsroom people would say? We need a new survey. Which what they're really saying is, we need new readers. So they're in a bubble, and they just won't step out of that enough to acknowledge that people have a different view and they need to be listened to, and people need to write stories from that point of view too. I think we have one more question here and then over there. Yes, sir.
We have one here, Peter.
Oh, okay.
Right here's next.
Okay.
Okay, yes. What do you see as the end game for the fake news? I mean, it's just getting more and more extreme as time goes on, it seems like. Assaults on the Second Amendment, open borders. I mean, the idea that we should even have guards is repulsive for some. The transgender, which when I was younger, I mean, okay, you treated homosexuals with respect, but you didn't expect them to change sex, you know, every day. And now they're saying even men can have babies. That, you know, and the Russia-Trump connection, which does not exist. China, which has great problems, but which is ignored. Is there an end game that you see to this? Is there an ultimate goal that they're trying to impose on us?
Just as an aside, one of my favorite headlines, I think it was on Drudge the other day, was, let's see if I can get this right. Woman transgendered as man marries man transgendered as woman. If that won't give you a headache, I mean, why don't you just leave it alone? You had one of each. I'm sure that's very insensitive, but I couldn't resist. So where it's headed, we're seeing the results, is the slow death of newspapers. We had once great newspapers that are no longer even published, or that are published once or twice a week. They have basically poisoned the well of their own credibility. And as people decide that they don't want to buy a newspaper or patronize a media that they don't trust, then they begin to shrink. The concern there is that then we don't have enough sources that give us a variety to make our guess as to where the truth is. And I see us also beginning to get more and more polarized. You know, in British newspapers are very clearly for one party or the other. American newspapers used to be that way too. One of the first papers I worked for was the Charlotte Republican Tribune. They put the party name right in the masthead. How many papers have you heard of? The Dayton Democrat. So what we're seeing is more and more partisan and divided media. And in a way that's bad, because it helps us reinforce our own biases, because we can select only that media that agrees with us, which I do increasingly, I admit. And that makes it harder and harder for me to carry on a conversation who's selecting from their media from an entirely different shopping basket. And we don't even have the same facts or versions of what happened. So I don't see it ending well. I'd hate to be gloomy about it, but I don't see it ending well.
Got a question right here.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Gary. Thanks for your time, first of all.
Thank you, Gary.
And two things come to mind. Two words come to mind. One is disappointing, and when is that going to end? And the second is accountability, and when is that going to start? And as one example, and there's many of them, but just today, how ironic that I listened to a documentary put on by 60 Minutes on the Vince Foster issue many years ago, and Mike Wallace it was terrible the way that testimony and that interview was edited and chopped and sentences cut off. But Mike Wallace is still held up on a pedestal in many people's viewpoint. And he had an agenda to protect that, that president. And when that president needed help, he went on 60 Minutes, and 60 Minutes built him up.
Yeah.
It's just, when is the accountability going to start?
Well, as we said here tonight, fake news is old. It's been around forever. And we're actually very fortunate because we live in a time now that no longer is monopolized by 3 networks. I mean, basically you had your local paper, New York Times, Washington Post, ABC, CBS, and NBC. That was it. That was the media. And if you were really thought they were too conservative, you could watch PBS. But now we have Fox, we have a lot of websites that are doing a great job. We have enterprising young people like James O'Keefe, who's out there turning over rocks to find stories that the rest of the media won't look at. So, I mean, we're fortunate that we're in a time of great turmoil and churn of media, and there's so much of it. It can be like trying to drink from a fire hose, to use the old cliche. But
we've got an online question in the back.
We have a couple of them. Thomas is asking if you could elaborate how much of a real difference you still see between hard news and opinion commentators.
Well, the line is blurred more and more. And I mean, it used to be when I was a reporter first, and I would, then I started writing columns, and then I became an editorial page editor and then a columnist, and I wrote columns almost through my entire career. So there was sort of a bright line there where if I was covering a meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals or the City Council, it was my job to basically just tell you who, what, where, when, why, and how it happened. And as a columnist, then I could come back and say, well, this is what it means to you, and this is what I think of it. That line, I don't think anybody really even tries to enforce it anymore. We see so many people on cable who are really opinion people who call themselves news reporters. And we see so many news reporters who are really blurring the line into opinion. And it's just, and then there's another whole problem, which is the revolving door of government people who go in to become journalists, like George Stephanopoulos and Russert and all these people who worked on the Hill for Democrats and then suddenly find a new career in media. They're all over the place. And what made them qualified to be a media person other than having a bigger agenda than everyone else? Buyer beware.
We've got a question here from Cheryl Pop, who did an EmpowerU session, I think 2 semesters ago, and she runs the great, incredible Honor Flight program. Let's give her a round of applause.
Well, today I'm here as a spectator. I'd like to ask you what we can do to help turn fake news around. I have one child that's a conservative and one that's a frickin' liberal. And I just want to know, what can I mean, I can't even talk to her mostly about anything, let alone anything important, because she's got the liberal stance. How do you, I mean, she was raised a conservative, God knows. How do we get to these younger people so that they can really see the truth instead of what they're being fed like in school or by the media?
That's a great question, and I've pondered that myself. A lot of times what we find ourselves doing is backing into our own bubble of friends who agree with us. And we don't want to bump into the bubble of the people who disagree with us, because that's conflict. Nobody likes conflict. And it's can be so frustrating because they don't, like you said, you can't even talk. So what do you do? Well, I was listening to a YouTube message from a guy named Alistair Beggs. Has anybody heard of him? Alistair Begg. He's a theologian, and he was talking on the subject of truth. And he said, on truth, what we have to do is don't be confrontational. Don't scold the other person and put them down because they don't understand. They don't know any better. And don't run from it. Don't hide. and don't accommodate or tolerate untruth and lies when you know better. Do your best to clarify it. Just speak up. Just say, wait a minute. That's not accurate. That's not what's true. The fact is such and such. I think if we just do that in a non-threatening, try to keep your blood pressure down, or you may ask somebody, you say, what makes you believe that? You know, everybody wants to tell you why they believe what they believe, and they love to talk. So what makes you believe that? Well, did you know so-and-so? Have you heard this? Have you, for example, have you heard about the experiment where they took true facts of immigration and gun control and had Hollywood actors read them as if they're trying for a casting part? And it practically caused their brains to melt down because they couldn't believe it. This is true. How can this be true? Well, that's the kind of thing, if you can expose people to truth, then you have to just kind of let truth take its, I hope.
We have another online question.
Thanks for coming, Cheryl.
We have a question from Jennifer. She's asking, what are journalists doing by pushing this socialist sympathizing narrative? Aren't they committing industry suicide? I'm guessing what she means by they're turning people off.
Absolutely. I used to say that a lot when I was working at the Enquirer. Some of the newsroom people would come back and we'd have these conversations, and they'd come back and say, you know, this column you wrote today, you don't really believe that, do you? And I'd go, now, wait a minute. Why would I sit down and write something and put my heart into it if I was just not even believing it? That's insulting. You know, what do you believe? Would you do that? So what it comes down to is, yes, they are in their bubble, and their friends tell them, the friends that they have in Clifton or wherever, not to be judgmental, tell them they're doing a great job. I love that story about the transgender kid, the 7-year-old who's wearing a dress, and I love that story you did, on, and they think they're just doing great. And meanwhile, they're killing the goose that lays the eggs for all of the media, because more and more, we had a discussion about this with our editor at the Enquirer, and they said they wanted to change the lineup of syndicated columnists because they were too conservative. They didn't think we should publish conservative columns by people like, at the time, one of the ones that I liked a lot, a friend of mine, the name is, it'll come to me in a second, black guy, very popular in Cincinnati, Walter Williams. Okay, they were desperate to get me to stop publishing Walter Williams' column. And I said, I'll do it. I'll take him out for a Sunday if you agree to take all the calls.
We've got a question right here, Peter.
The editor said, fine. We didn't publish him Sunday. On Monday, he got the calls. On Monday afternoon, he came back in and he said, go ahead, put him back.
Funny. Here you go.
Peter, my name's Bob. How do we really determine what's fake news and what's real news? You mentioned before that we will follow our own instincts and what we want to hear. But, you know, I see both sides, liberals, conservatives, both doing fake news. So how do we really determine what, or where do we start with that? Or how do we even determine what is real that we used to know?
Well, I can tell you that once upon a time, we would trust some of these things like Snopes or the fact checkers that we would have, like PolitiFact, but they've become totally partisan and biased also, so that they'll give 5 Pinocchios because a Republican misspoke, and then a Democrat tells an outright lie, and it's like, well, he just didn't quite say it right. So it's difficult. There is no easy way. All I can suggest is do what I do, which is find sources that you trust, and then just treat every story with a whole shaker of salt and try to verify it, try to find more sources, try to find other ways to make it valid. But I think in the end, we have to decide who is trustworthy, What sources are trustworthy? Do we see, for example, is it verified by our own experience? Sorry, I can't be more helpful. I wish there was.
Right over here.
My name is Mel, and to reference, earlier you told somebody that if they liked something that they saw on TV or in the newspaper or whatever, to tell them. Don't just tell them, tell their boss.
Yeah, good point.
As well, and go up as high as you can.
Good point.
I've heard a lot of stuff here this evening, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people that are interested in a lot of the comments that were made, and too many to relate. But a question, are some of these fake stories possibly started because somebody didn't have enough time to fully investigate it, and now they have to publish it and by whatever means and then move on?
Well, that's for sure part of the problem. What we saw, and I can just go from my own experience on this at the Enquirer, was that as our staff was whittled deeper and deeper, fewer and fewer people were doing more. They didn't have enough bodies. So these reporters would have to run from a court case to the city hall, back to the police station, and all this time they are now content providers, not reporters. So they have to collect video and photos and then write an online story. And meanwhile, I saw, and I've witnessed over the years, and I'm sure you have too, it's as if all the editors have been abducted by aliens. The mistakes are appalling. You know, misuse of words, egregiously bad spellings that can't be excused by a typo. Just bad writing and incorrect stories. We have people writing stories that don't understand Cincinnati, and you can tell it. And all of this adds up to lack of trust, and it also adds up to a lot more mistakes that are not being stopped by the editors who might have otherwise said, I need you to go back and check that. It just doesn't ring true. I don't think they do. I don't think they do.
Can I put you on the spot, Peter?
Sure. I won't promise to answer.
I think a semester ago, we were on the west side at one of the elementary schools, and we did a session on sanctuary cities. 100 people showed up. Not a single one of them was in favor of it. David Mann stood up there for an hour and a half and gracefully took just the onslaught of people who were opposed to that. I'm just wondering if you were at the Enquirer and understanding how hard it is right now, what would you say? What would you say about sanctuary cities?
I would say it's a huge mistake. In fact, I wrote editorials about that when I was in Tucson because it became a big issue down there long before it got up here. That was back in the 90s, even the late 80s. And we had a sanctuary city movement in Tucson, and we had people pushing that, and I was dead opposed. You just can't do that. You can't violate the law in the name of your feelings and say that we're a nation of laws. The law matters. If you want to change the law, go ahead, more power to you, but the law matters. And I'm really gratified to see all these California counties and cities that are resisting what the state has done. And maybe we're going to have a big showdown about that. Maybe it's going to be sort of like this caravan thing where the president, finally, we have somebody who's got the guts to stand up and say, enough, enough. And the law is on his side, so.
Thank you. Any thoughts about the John Cranley, Harry Black situation?
Yeah.
I'm tired of reading about it.
Well, how many remember the Jerry Newfarmer, Dwight Tillery battle? Yeah? It's not the first time we've had one of those battles. Or you can even go back to Stan Schroetel, the police chief, who was kind of eased out, although he was probably the best chief Cincinnati ever had, because the mayor and the council thought he was stealing too much attention. And there's John Shar. I mean, this is a long history of city managers always have an uneasy relationship with the politicians. In this case, I would say it's pretty clear that Black overstepped, that he should have talked to Cranley, because Cranley does have responsibility. He's ultimately the guy who has to answer. And in this case, I think Black overstepped, and if Cranley wants to fire him, I don't have any problem with it.
We've got an online question back there.
Keith is wondering if you have an opinion on whether the media, in effect, is engaging in fake news, talking about healthcare, His take on it is because he believes that much of what they're reporting is not backed by science.
Well, I think that's probably true. There's an awful lot of stories out there that aren't backed by science, that are just kind of whatever you can get some expert or some professor to claim or say. I mean, for crying out loud, how many times have we cured cancer in mice? We did it with coffee. We did it with bran muffins. Then we caused it with coffee. Then we caused it with bran. I mean, over and over, if you had all the times that the media has told you that they have found a cure for cancer, we would have no worries about it, right? There would never be another case, but it's been fake news. It's just somebody that comes with a story, and it makes people, like what the Pope said, it's something we want to believe, so we go ahead and go with it. But
we're going to take 2 more questions right here.
Okay.
Anybody else have a question?
I'm surprised by this time that President Trump has not initiated or caused to be initiated a new television station or radio station or newspaper that could tell the truth to the extent that people would gravitate to that source.
Well, the market will do that. The market has done it. Remember when there was no Fox? Remember when there was no talk radio? And the market embraced those because there are so many people like me, like many of you out there, who want another opinion, who don't just want to get the one side. And so I'm optimistic that more and more media will emerge. It's just going to get a lot more like the Tower of Babel, where we have all these different voices speaking different tongues. And we won't be able to understand each other. I mean, there's a lesson in that story, right?
We've got one last online question right here.
Actually, I'm going to ask a question if it's okay, Dan. Peter, I hear a lot about obviously reporters, and we know there's reporters who are very biased, and that bias shows up in the reporting. You also hear about reporters who supposedly are frustrated because they're trying to tell the truth and it's being blocked by editors. So if you talk broadly about reporters versus middle level editors and producers, and then of course top management, do you put the focus equally, or do you have an opinion on that?
I think it varies case to case. I know that what I saw, and I was optimistic about some of the young reporters that were coming to the Enquirer, and they would kind of come back to where I worked as a columnist. They kind of look around like they didn't want anybody to see them, and then they say, "Hey, that was a great column," They were conservatives. They agreed, but they didn't want anybody to know. They were in the closet because their editors and all the rest of the newsroom were middle-aged hippies who would crack the whip and get them in line if they started. They'd write a story. I mean, I have lots of stories from reporters who wrote a certain story that the editor didn't like, and they said, "We're not running this. Go back and quote somebody else and get this story. Go get the story I want, not the truth as you saw it." So yeah, it happens at all levels. It can happen as high as we saw with Chiquita, all the way to the top of Gannett. And it can happen all the way to the bottom, which was the reporter who made the decision to go ahead and wiretap to get the story. So it's all over the place. And when we're done here, I have a few more books left. I'll be glad to sign them for anybody. Usually 15, but I'll give them to you for 10.
So buy.
And,
so listen, if I had the ability to rename the session tonight, I would call it Peter Bronson Unplugged. What a great opportunity. Thank you very much. It's wonderful.
Thank you very
really
much.
great having you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And just 2 things I wanted to ask you. I wanted to remind you of a session I forgot to mention, May 24th. We're going to have a great session on the Beverly Hills Supper Club.
That'll be a good one.
And one of the best pieces of writing on that, I read the whole thing word for word, is an article that Peter wrote. Was it in Cincinnati Magazine?
It's in Cincy Magazine. You can find it online. April 2 years ago, I think.
And so if you're going to come that night, it's going to be busy that night. Put your reservation in and read his article before you come, because it's really, really interesting. And the only other thing I wanted to start to talk about is our big season-ending event, May the 2nd, with Rocky Boyman right here. So thanks again. Let's thank our guests one more time. It's great having him here. And we'll see everybody hopefully at one of our next sessions. Thank you.